Hello, and welcome back to week 25 of the No BS Homebuyers Live series, where I am breaking down the home buying process into no BS steps, simple steps, so that you can go from thinking about buying to actually owning a home. So imagine you have found the perfect home and your offer is accepted, you've gotten through inspections, and they are all done and you're in your mind mentally like arranging the furniture of your new house. And then the appraisal comes back in $20,000 under what you offered. Most buyers are immediately going to think, great, the deal is dead. But today we're going to talk all about appraisals and explain what that situation really is, what an appraisal means, and help you move forward more confidently so you aren't in a terrible situation if an appraisal does come in low and you are ready and prepared for when a situation like that does arise. So, a low appraisal is a problem to solve, but not a reason to panic. So, let's learn more today about how to not panic in this situation. All right, let's just kind of start with what is an appraisal. If you've never been in the industry, you might not even know what an appraisal is. It is an independent opinion of value. So essentially, it is someone coming in and saying, hey, a house is worth this much. And this person is typically an appraiser. And appraisers are licensed professionals. They go through a lot of education, and in a lot of states, they have to do some type of apprenticing and so many hours of that to even get their appraiser's license. So they are licensed professionals that do have a good history with this. So they do know what they're talking about. But I will tell you right now, an appraisal is an art form, not a science. And you may have three different appraisers appraising the same house, and they might all come back with a different appraisal price. So just understand ahead of time what an appraiser is, what they do. They do have background in it, but it is still an opinion at the end of the day. And who hires the appraisal truly is actually the bank that is lending you money. And they're hiring the appraisal so that way they can determine that what they are paying for the house or helping you pay for the house is worth that amount. So that way they're not initially underwater. Because in the event that you default on paying your house and you quit paying and they have to take back the property and sell it on the market, they want to know that they're not going to be at a total loss. They understand that there is cost to sell the property as well. So if they're already underwater before the property even gets to the market, they're not going to be happy, which is why a bank will not lend if an appraisal comes in low, at least not lend on anything above the appraisal price. So we always want to remember an appraiser is actually hired by the lender, and they are a qualified professional. They do use recent sales to determine what the value is going to be. And so we have to recognize that they're looking at comparables, and they might not always be looking at the same comparables that maybe you are or your realtor is. And each appraiser, again, is a little bit different, but they're typically looking in the same type of style, same age range, same date range, and trying to match as closely as they can to the house that you are purchasing with their comparable properties. And they're evaluating more than just the price. They're looking at the condition of the house, the amenities of the house, size, location, and if there's extra upgrades, like if there's a new roof, a new furnace, some of these big ticket items, they're also taking into consideration when appraising your house. So let's just say, from the lender's perspective, like I said, the appraisal is actually for the lender. But if you're buying a house for $300,000, the lender just wants to know that it's actually worth that $300,000. Because if it's less, then they're going to be in a real tough situation if you quit paying. And the lender, they aren't lending on the house that you love. They're lending on what it's worth. It is a business decision for them. So it's understandable that they want to make sure that the property, you know, is worth what you're paying for it. All right, let's talk a little bit about why an appraisal matters. And again, it is to protect the lender from a bad deal. So just remember that if a house is worth 280,000, but you're paying 300,000, the lender's not going to want to lend based on the higher number because they could only sell it for 280,000. So you have to keep that in mind, and that is why we do appraisals. So it's not judging your taste, it is a measure of risk for the bank. All right, now let's talk about an appraisal gap. And an appraisal gap could technically be the difference between the appraised price and the purchase price, and that could be a higher number. But in most cases, it's actually what the appraised price is and lower. So if I think I kind of confused the way I said that, but essentially, if there is a difference between the appraised price and the purchase price, that would be considered an appraisal gap. Where it causes problems is where your purchase price is higher than what the appraised price is. So, for example, if your purchase price was 350,000, but it only appraised for 335,000, you have a 15,000 appraisal gap, $15,000 appraisal gap in the negative. So one thing when we're looking at appraisals and kind of thinking, wow, why did this underappraise or why didn't this appraise at the right value? We get kind of caught up that, maybe there was multiple offers. And do appraisers take that into consideration? Yes, because the appraisal should be based off the market value, but it doesn't always guarantee that that's going to bring the price to the higher purchase price. They don't really care what the other offers were. They're only really evaluating what the winning offer is. And they aren't probably going to see all of the other offers anyway, unless the listing agent provides those to them. And when we have an appraisal gap, that's when the buyer, the seller, and the lender all are kind of teaming up together to make a decision on how to move. So let's talk about some of the common solutions. And I'm sorry, my assistant is here chatting with us. But let's talk about some common solutions to a low appraisal. Because most of these gaps have a possible solution or a multitude of solutions that you can combine together to still get to the closing table. So option one, and if I'm representing the buyer, my most preferred option is the seller would then reduce the purchase price. So if we go back to that 350 purchase price and then 335 appraisal, essentially in this option, the seller would just say, hey, it only appraised at 335. I will sell it to you for that. That is option one. Seller reduces the price. And this is often the cleanest, easiest, and quickest solution. And a lot of sellers, if you are the only offer and they've been sitting on the market a while, a lot of them are going to go that route because they know now that they have to disclose, oh, we had an appraisal at 335. And that's something they're going to have to disclose. And why, unless someone is going to come in and buy and pay extra cash to cover that, it's kind of unlikely. So in certain situations, it's pretty common for the sellers to lower their price. Option number two would be the buyer has to bring additional cash to the table. So that could be, you've got extra cash in your savings that you're going to just pay on top of it. You have to be careful with this one because sometimes if you're bringing more cash, you're reducing your reserves required to get the loan. So this isn't always an option for buyers. This is something that has to be thoroughly discussed with the lender to make sure that that is even truly an option. And then the third option would be to meet in the middle, whether that's the seller comes down some on price or the buyer brings some more to the table, or maybe they get some gift funds from some family members that allows them to kind of meet in the middle so that 350 purchase price ends up getting, let's say, reduced $5,000, and then the buyer finds $10,000 to bring to the table, and then they've then covered that $15,000 gap. Or, you split it half and half with the seller. And then another option that is not as common because it is more intensive would be to challenge the appraisal. As I have said before, an appraisal is technically just an opinion. So they might not see all of the comparables that you are, or maybe they miss that the house has a brand new roof and a brand new furnace, and they didn't account for that in the price, and we're only talking a couple $1,000s. You could challenge the appraisal and ask for them to review it. Sometimes there's factual errors. Sometimes there's just comparable sales that were just completely missed. I mean, we're human, things happen. but that is an option. You do want to check with the lender on what that process looks like and expect a potential delay in closing. And also be aware if the appraiser completely disagrees and actually thinks the house their appraisal was quite generous, they could lower the appraisal. So you just need to be aware of all the risks of challenging an appraisal ahead of time and really talking through that with your lender. Um, and it doesn't happen often, but it does happen, and it is an option to explore if you are running into a sticky appraisal situation. And then option number 5 would be to walk away. And this will all depend on your purchase contract and why your realtor is so important in explaining what happens next. Because if you walk away, there's certain contingencies typically with financing that if you can't get it appraised, that you have the right to walk away and get your earnest deposit back. I'm sure every state is a little bit different on that. So you want to be very aware of what that looks like ahead of time. Um, and then also, at least in contracts I write for buyers, a lot of times I will say the property must appraise at or above the purchase price, or the buyers and sellers agree to renegotiate. I put that in, even though our paperwork does. There is a financing contingency, so if you can't get the financing or the bank isn't going to lend on it, you have an out. But I like to put that there too because sometimes there is a workaround, whether that's the buyer bringing a little extra cash, the seller coming down on price. I don't want the contract to just drop dead because the bank's not going to lend on it, but we're not going to look at other options. So again, rely on your realtor because they can help you walk through the paperwork and help you with the suggestions of wording on some of these extra clauses to help protect you in the event of a low appraisal. And just know there's almost never just one solution for an appraisal gap. You just have to be able to discuss it with the seller, you as the buyer, and the lender to make sure that it all works for every party and that financing can still go through. All right. So let's talk about some of the biggest appraisal myths. I think the first one is a low appraisal means you've overpaid. And that's not necessarily true. Depending again on the opinion of the appraiser, they may have just not found the comps that you were finding, so they may have not quite got it quite where you wanted it. Or in a multiple offer situation, if there's 5 people saying, "Hey, we're going to pay 20 grand over," you know, that doesn't mean you overpaid. It means that the market was determining that it was worth 20 grand more than it was listed for. So just because you have a low appraisal doesn't mean you're getting a terrible deal. It just is a situation to work through. But it is there to protect the bank for overpayment in the event they have to take the property and sell it. So just it's not a guarantee that you've overpaid if you have a low appraisal. All right, myth number 2, the deal is dead. Oh no, my property didn't appraise. Now I can't buy the house. That's just not true. We just walked through 5 different options, 4 of which could potentially still get you the house. So the deal is not dead, at least usually not. If you're willing to work through it and work with the lender, the seller, and the buyer, if they're playing nice, it doesn't mean it's dead. It just means you have another hurdle. All right. And myth number 3, the appraiser is always right. No, appraisers are professionals, but they are human. They are using the data, but they're also using their judgment and looking at and comparing other houses with similar conditions. But it is not just a checkbox here, checkbox here, checkbox here. This creates the price. That is not how an appraisal works. So know that appraiser is not always right, but you also want to be kind of nice to the appraisers because if you really make them mad, then they don't have to change their opinion. And you have to get creative and go another route. So that is kind of the down low on appraisals and what to do in the event of an appraisal gap. One appraisal gap that we kind of didn't talk about is if your purchase price is lower than your appraised price. In theory, you have instant equity. In theory, you could buy the house. Let's say you buy it for 335. Your purchase price was 335, but it appraised at 350. Well, congratulations, you have $15,000 of equity. which again, in theory, you list the property tomorrow and you list it at 350 and you get it sold for that. But nothing is true equity until you actually sell. But that is a positive thing if your appraisal comes in higher than your purchase price. But 9 times out of 10, the appraiser is pretty much just going to come in at what the purchase price is, unless there is a big discrepancy where it really truly is over any comparable properties. Most of the time, appraisers are coming in at that purchase price to keep things simple and easy. Okay, so I just want you to feel good now that you know a little bit more about appraisals. And if you hear of a low appraisal, it may still feel a little bit scary, but I hope you feel more prepared on your options and what to do moving forward and what the appraisal even means and what it's for. Because really, it's just a new section of negotiation within the purchase contract. And an appraisal gap isn't a disaster, it's a conversation, it's a negotiation. So don't fear it, just be prepared when or if it does come up. But if you are approaching the appraisal phase or you just have any kind of questions about understanding appraisals or the market, one, you are welcome to ask questions in here. But if not, I am happy to help at any time or connect you with a realtor in your local area that is more in tune with your specific purchase agreement, and help you go from, just thinking about things to actually making some action. I would gladly connect you with a realtor. But next week, we are going to be diving into the whole buying timeline. So you have a little bit better of an idea of, I'm just thinking about buying to actually owning a home. So we will jump into that next week, give you some more clarity and confidence so you can do it yourself. But thank you for joining me on this week's No BS Home Buyers Live series, where we're breaking down the process into simple, easy steps so you can go from thinking about buying to actually owning. And we'll see you next week. Bye bye.